Hey, what? Hey, what's your self-talk? This is Jabari here with another episode of What's Your Self-Talk. Now, the reason I ask that question because I want you to always ask that question. What's your self-talk to see what are the things that you need to do to be able to expand your potential. So today, I have a very special guest who have turned into be a good friend of me and my wife, Miss Joy Bradford, life coach, life coach, Miss Joy Bradford. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Glad to be here. Super excited to chat about the topics that are at hand today. I think it's going to be a good day.
Yes. So, a little bit about Joy. Now, anybody who's very familiar with the Enneagram, Joy is a 7.
I
Yes.
am. I am.
So that means you got two sevens on a podcast. So we're not gonna have much structure, but we're gonna have a lot of fun. So I think we're okay with that.
Yes.
So Joy, so tell me more about yourself. What got you into this area and space of life coach? And how long have you been doing it?
Sure. So I have been officially a life coach for almost 2 years, but I found myself life coaching before I was actually certified because it's just kind of what I was wired to do. I've worked in different spaces with college students and just I was on the college scene. I've been in corporate America nonprofit work, that type of thing. And I just found myself having these conversations, asking people questions. And when we left the conversation, they circle back and say, wow, like I didn't think about it like that. Or now that I'm putting this into practice, I'm seeing success in this regard. And so I always knew that I had a niche, a desire, a passion to help people be the best versions of themselves. And so instead of just doing it for fun, which is, I'm still having fun, I also get to do it as a passion. It also is a blessing to me and my family as I've been able to bring on clients and enhance them to, my motto is being the best version of yourself, because there's no competition in your own lane. All you have to do is work hard to make sure that you are developing and growing and taking yourself to the next level in every area.
I love it. It's no competition in your own lane. So,
Yep.
I love that, and I think that is so important. I think one thing I do think about is like we used to hear so much about you got to be better than the next person, and really at the end of the day, it's really you against you. I think
Yes.
more than anything.
Yes. I
Uh,
absolutely agree.
so
Absolutely agree.
let me ask you this: so we originally met last year
That's
at
correct.
a marriage retreat, and I got a chance to definitely connect with your husband,
Mm-hmm.
TJ, who's man ever since last year. Man, we've definitely been connected. Probably I don't know more than you know, but I don't know, but he's been a blessing to me for many
Yes. Oh, he is always talking about Jabari. Talk to Jabari today. Talk to my boy Jabari today. So he is just as much a blessing to him. So yeah, I think you guys did connect, and he's enjoyed staying in touch with you as well.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So what? So a little bit of how did we? I'm curious in the conversation because now the marriage retreat, the very first year we talked
Uh-huh.
about it. It was some friends of us. We was all at a wedding, and we was like, man, we want to
Right.
get together because the main thing we wanted to do, we have similar faith. We both believe in Jesus, and we was like, hey, we want to strengthen our marriage. We want to make sure this is be an ongoing thing. And so I remember the first year, like, I was kind of orchestrating, and then the second year came around and Joy came in. I'm like, oh yes, please, amen, praise the Lord. I'm feeling this. So tell me, how did you get pulled into that
Yeah.
and ran with it?
Yeah. So some of the friends that we share are the Davises, of course, and
Mm-hmm.
another one of the things that I do is I have the opportunity to work for the nonprofit of Demario Davis. And so him and his wife Tamala, me and TJ were sitting down and just kind of talking about different things that we had in common, our passions, what we felt called to. And ever since probably 2 years into our marriage, TJ and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that we were called as a couple to help enhance, develop, grow, challenge, heal marriages. And so from there, we've had the opportunity to counsel several couples through that. We're actually counseling two right now, one that's getting married in April and one that's getting married in October. And so it's what we do, it's what we enjoy doing. So after a conversation with the Davises, they were like, wait, we actually do a marriage conference with some, or retreat with some really close friends. some previous ball players that Demario went to college with. How do you guys think about coming? And we were like, oh yeah, we're game. You're believers. You love God. You love fun, and you love marriage. Sign us up. And so they were like, come on. And if you guys have any ideas or whatever, just bring your ideas. Everybody's going to be super cool, down to earth, and they're going to enjoy it. And let's just see, what happens. And we were like, absolutely. So we came last year, had a good time, and then thought that we wanted to bring even more conversation, more structure, and even some fun for this year. And I do want to insert this for those who are listening. You guys, we played games every day that we were there. And tell me why the McLennans, Jabari and his wife, Shania, went home with over half of the prizes. I'm like, how did you guys win? We were not anticipating the same couple winning every game. And they came in and cleaned house. So I don't know how I feel about that. I'm a little salty, not gonna lie. But we love you guys anyway. So we just had a good time and wanted to bring good conversation, challenging thought, just growth perspective, and also fun to an opportunity for us to grow and develop in our marriages.
I love that. Yeah. So, side note, yeah, me and my wife is super competitive. I never forget the very, very first date we went on. We went bowling, and I was not like on that tip, like, okay, I'm gonna let you win so you can like, no, 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 bro. If you gonna win, you gonna win the right way. So,
Wow.
and she was okay with that, and it was like, okay, I like this. So that's kind of it's funny. So that's just our nature, that competitiveness. So
Yes.
I love it. I love it. So okay. So backtrack a little. So yes, I played football with Demario. And how long have you known Demario? I think you've known a little bit longer than me.
Just a little bit longer. So we actually went to high school together.
Okay.
We went to high school together. I was a year older than him. So I graduated in the class of 2006. He graduated in the class of 2007. So we went through most of our high school years together until I graduated a year before him, a year before him. And then he went to college. I went to college, lost touch, and then connected again on a nonprofit type ministry type opportunity. And we've been connected, and our families have been connected ever since. That was back in 2000, and I guess the reconnection happened maybe in 2016, something like that. And we've been in touch since then.
I love it. I love it. So, all right. So y'all was sitting down talking with the Davises, and you're like, man, me and TJ have this passion for, serving and loving couples. So one thing I'm always curious of to hear, and I really want to hear your perspective on it, is how do couples get together and determine, okay, this is something we're both passionate about, and this is something we can pursue together. Like, how did that evolve for you guys?
That's a really good question. So I think those individual conversations had to happen first. So for TJ and I, when we went through marriage counseling, my pastor, my previous pastors, they've seen people do different lengths of marriage counseling, but they said, you know what, Joy, we want you guys to do a year of counseling. We were like, a year of premarital counseling? That is excessive. And so I remember having to read the books and answer the questions. And I was like, wow, this is so much. But hindsight, our first year of marriage, people say, it's the honeymoon phase. Everything is perfect. It was so challenging. It was not perfect. It was really hard. And we learned some really hard lessons. But from there, now I see what God was doing in the background and the details. We have just a super passion, a super just heart for seeing marriages happen successfully, seeing marriages thrive. And I think that our challenges that we overcame and went through had a lot to do with us just having that passion. So TJ and I determined that early on, like, this is what we're called to. And then sitting down with Demario and Tamala, I don't know their back history of just how their marriage transpired, but they just talked about how they haven't seen the healthy marriages. We haven't seen this great healthy marriage examples. And we're like, there has to be a thing where you enjoy your spouse, where you enjoy life, where you are not just married because it's a thing to do, but you're growing together, you're thriving together. So when we sat down and shared thoughts and realized we think the same about this marriage thing, right? We said, well, we want to make sure other people are impacted and blessed by this. We're not going to just keep this to ourselves. And they said, we're already doing something of sorts. And so they're like, y'all should just come out and do this. And I'm like, sign me up. So that's kind of how we did it. We kind of began to realize that we were on the same page about what healthy marriage is supposed to look like.
So a year in premarital counseling,
a year.
That is, I have to.
Intense.
Yeah, that's intense. I respect that. And me and my Chanel, we did premarital counseling, and we even premarital counsel some people, some couples, as well. And it's interesting to think about the concept of doing that for a full year, because I mean, you are technically studying you're
That's
dedicated to
right.
studying each other, which is
That's
a
right.
good thing, because if you're gonna spend your life with someone, you need to
That's right.
fully understand how they click and how you respond to that. So it's that's healthy. I think that's super healthy. So what do you say to somebody who never had premarital counseling but wants to still have a successful marriage?
I think I think it is never a bad idea to start. So
Mm-hmm.
most like other things, people say, well, if you didn't get it in the beginning, it's too late. I disagree. I think that at any point in your marriage, if you realize, you know what, we didn't do premarital counseling, it won't be premarital counseling, but marital counseling is still very healthy. And so I'd say for them to seek out an opportunity to chat, even if there's nothing wrong. Counseling is, I think people have a preconceived notion that counseling is to help people because they're wrong or they're messed up or there's a problem. That's not the case. A lot of times counseling is maintenance. A lot of times counseling is just new information. A lot of times counseling is learning a perspective of your spouse that maybe you can't see, but another person communicating from the outside looking in, the light bulbs go off. And so I think that understanding that, number one, counseling is a positive thing. It's not when things are broken. Sometimes it is, but not all the time. Number one. And number two, I would say with a marriage or a couple who has not had counseling yet or haven't had it before marriage, that learning how to communicate with their spouse is a foundational principle to a successful marriage. Because a lot of times, if we don't have that piece together, everything else kind of derails from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is so true. That's literally, I think, the one thing. If me and my wife always raise our hand, it's the one thing is, what's the one thing y'all should? Communication.
Yeah.
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 And you're just two different people, and I
That's
think
right.
we alluded to this a little bit at Marjorie, but like you evolve and you change over time, and
That's
so
right. That's
not
right.
only is it important for you to understand it, but you got to learn how to communicate that.
Yes.
Or if you can't communicate that, having a close connection with that your spouse to help them see, hey, I think maybe we can talk, or I see some things. Do you see this? Just it's different for everyone, but um, that's just interesting, and I think it's important to call it out or to talk about it, because what I've
Yes.
noticed is ignoring things and not talking about it. That's not good.
Mm. No, no. There's not very many positive things that come out of pushing things under a rug or just kind of putting to the side, because eventually it's going to fester and it's going to overflow.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll look different for different people, but and to try to avoid it getting to that place, I think just having a frequent check in to just say, hey babe, how you feeling? What's on your
Mm-hmm.
mind? What you thinking? Where you gauge on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being I'm perfect, 0 being what is life? Where are you?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we navigate this together? And especially with different seasons changing. Okay, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. There's just different things that happen, right? So
Yeah.
how do you navigate marriage when the outer things that you cannot control are going crazy? You realize that you can control what's happening in your house and in your marriage, and you thrive in that capacity, and try to make sure that you enjoy that space, because the worst thing you can do is to live with a person that you feel like you can't can't connect with, or can't get through to, and that's just, it's not very fun. So learning to communicate is imperative.
Right. Right. And so, do you talked about this one, and I'm gonna bring it up, but I'm curious if you think it's something else. But one of the reasons I think was a common interest for all of us was that they weren't around many healthy marriages.
Yeah.
And what that's a one indicator I think was like, hey, this is a reason why I want to grow and I want us to grow in our marriage. But would you say, like, is that maybe like the main indicator, or have you seen or been aware of any other indicators besides like not being around a healthy marriage? I mean, not being around other healthy marriages. Have you seen any other indicators that's like, hey, these are things that's a kind of a red flag, saying like, hey, we need to shift our environment or work on things better. Like, have you seen anything like that as you talk with other couples, and you guys and you and TJ talked about it specifically?
Yeah, I'd say that's maybe a primary, or definitely something that we speak about or see often. But I think too, it was an education drive. So in other words, understanding that lack of knowledge and not understanding information, or not, you're not seeing a healthy marriage, but also you have preconceived notions. You
Mm.
don't really understand what it is anyway. So not only do I not see examples living out loud in front of me, which may or may not affect people just depending on who they are, where they are, how they move, but the idea is that marriage is supposed to be like this and it's not supposed to be like that. Who says that? Who says that? So using, of course, the word of God as a guide, but
Mm-hmm.
also just healthy tools and figuring out what works best for you and your spouse. So I hear people say, well, we talked a little bit about it when we had the marriage retreat the last week, but we talked about just family roles and dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
So who does what? I know some dads that stay home and the mom goes to work. There's nothing wrong with that. I know dads that do laundry, husbands that do laundry. That's fine too. So I think that sometimes we have this idea, well, my wife is going to do this or my husband's going to do this because that's what they're supposed to do. Hey, if that works, great. If not, let's go back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm.
So not only is it just not the healthy marriage you see, but also understanding where do I fit in our world, how it pertains to marriage and healthy marriage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think you've kind of good segue into just talking about some of the things we did talk about the marriage retreat, and specifically, what brought up some of those conversation points, and you just kind of talked about roles, like, and we can just start on there. So, and I'll tell you kind of I'll give you my backstory for anybody who doesn't know it. That way, I can use myself for an example, because I'm like,
Sure.
I'm also using this as a small way, like, hey, how can I get better? So I'm recording this, but I'm like, hey, I want some bonus tips, give me
I love it.
give me some jewels. So okay, so I grew up
I got you, bro.
I grew up in a divorced household with mainly living between both mom and dad. So I had a very dominant dad who was always right, and I had a very loving mom who was, she didn't take anything, but also she was very loving and accepting, and didn't want confrontation, wanted to have everyone get along. So it was a interesting environment, and to be honest with you, like, it kills me because, like, I think just so many years ago, I've seen for the first time, I think we went to a funeral, and I had seen a picture of my parents, and they were both happy together. Like, I'm 29, 30. That was my first time seeing it ever in life.
Wow.
And you got to think, like, man, like, how much more do I have inside of me that I wish happened, and which did not happen to my parents. And so I say all that to say, so my dad was a very dominant. He's a very dominant personality style, like, kind of ex-military type guy, like, and still to this day, like, he's very predictable, but at the same time, it's like, you need to, if I say this is what's gonna happen. And
right.
we're gonna go at it. And so I knew growing up, like, even like just living with my dad, like, and he was never remarried or anything, never had women around. So it was that conversation piece of, like, he always would tell me, like, you should expect to do this, or expect a woman to do that and do this. And even though I didn't really believe him, because I mean, when you grow up, you see, okay, my parents divorced, I'm not gonna really listen to you. But I think, like, what I found out, like, just being completely honest, is, like, I think I still, like, listen to some of that, like, subconsciously. And then I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, this, like, as you live life and you with someone, you're like, well, I never really agreed with that, but why am I thinking this, or why am I, portraying this model? So, like, what do you think, like, some tips to, like, identify that? Because, like, I really didn't. We talked about roles, and I think I evolved a lot in my marriage as far as roles, but I think coming in, I had a very skewed view of what the roles should look like. And through trial and error, I think through all of us, I've understood, like, okay, I was wrong. And how can you like continue to identify those things and work on them? What's your take?
What you shared is great, and I think it's real, because one of the things that I noticed is I took note. My parents were married my entire life, upbringing. They actually still are married. They're just separated, but they did not model a healthy. I just knew something was off. And so there are mental notes that I took about how that probably isn't a good idea, or I don't like that, or I'll never do that to my husband. But I found myself, once married, falling into those same patterns, very similar to what you shared. And I think one of the things that was primarily helpful is that my husband and I had a transparent enough relationship for him to call me out. He said, babe, just so you know, I see this happening. and that's your mom. Now, in the moment, I was like, how dare you? I was not
Mm.
trying to hear it, but it was helpful because there are blind spots that
Mm.
you have, just like in a car. There are certain spots you cannot see. I don't care which way you look. So it's important that you have people in your life that are able to identify those. And so I think being just that intimate and that just connected to your spouse for them to be able to identify them is important. Number one, but number two, I think too, doing some self reflection. Just because we say we won't do things, we are creatures of habit. And what we see is oftentimes what we reproduce. We hear people tell their kids, do what I say and not as I do. That does not happen.
Mm.
We do as we see. And so just like we may tell ourselves we won't, or I'll never, unless you take some real self-reflection and really be really extremely intentional, checking in with yourself regularly to make sure you stay on track with something, you can slide into habits or generational curses that you've seen, and the pattern just continues. And so it's good to say it, it's good to speak it, that type of thing, but it requires more than just saying I won't be that way. What are you going to do to not be that way? How are you going to be, who are you going to have in your life to hold you accountable for not being that way? And if someone sees you become that way, are you going to be offended if somebody called you out? Growth probably won't happen if you're not willing to go deep and to strip back layers that may go below the surface that you're aware of. And so I think just having those people in your life, being able to have people to speak to it and being extremely intentional about it is steps you can take. But unfortunately, just saying you won't do it, it's just not enough.
Yeah, that's good. That's just real good.
Thanks.
Yes, 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 yes. I'm gonna let that meditate. Um,
It's
uh,
real though. It's real. I feel you. Like I understand the challenge. It's much easier said than done. A lot of things you can say though. Like
mhm.
just what you just said than done. Absolutely. It's just much easier said that I'm not gonna do that than actually not do it. But if you want to grow, you have to be willing to say, you know what? I'm trying to be the very best version of myself. And I strive to do that. I'm not in comparison with anybody except for the girl in the mirror. And that's enough work. I can't keep up with myself and everybody else because I have enough going on. But you
Yeah,
just have to have people in your corner that are like, championing you, cheerleading you, but also will call you out on your crap.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. No, that's very true. I mean, and one of the things I always talk about on this podcast is like, one day I use this as a platform that, my son and my kids is gonna listen to this one day, and
Yeah.
I, how where will we be like? Wouldn't it be cool to listen in on conversations or like the journey of the Martin Luther King, or maybe Tony Evans, or just different people that we admire,
Yeah.
and just like having like a little snapshot of like, how did you overcome this? Yeah, it's cool to be able to listen to it after the fact, but
Right.
and, and so for me, I know it's me having to humble myself so much to say, hey, if I know I'm committed to growth and making myself better, and I have to be able to say, okay, that is the issue. And if it's been called out, accept that, right? Like you have to be
Right.
able to accept the reality of
Absolutely.
whatever is happening. Because if you
Hmm.
don't, like, and this is, I'm speaking from experience, like if you don't, you just create tension that you may consciously be aware of or unconsciously is or aware of.
Yeah.
And that's just good. And I remember us having those conversations, and I was just going around listening. I'm like, dang man, y'all gave this a lot of thought. I'm like, I feel like, goodness gracious, like I ain't got nothing to say. I'm just taking it all in. And
You
so
had great insight as well, though. You had great insight. You had great questions. You provoked a lot of thought with the
right.
input that you gave as well. So, no, you were a
Well,
great part of the discussion.
no, and I appreciate that, but I'm just saying, like, it was great for you to like prepare that question
Yeah.
around roles, because it was just really helpful. So, what was some other questions that you can recall that we discussed that you think is definitely helpful? Been in the setting of a marriage retreat, and that was healthy conversation for us.
Yeah, so we kind of went on, I don't want to say every end of the spectrum, but of course we discussed communication, we discussed intimacy and how that's much more than sex. We discussed generational curses, which is a real thing, and if we're not mindful, we'll repeat patterns and sometimes dig deeper than our parents, and it's worse than the situation that may have preceded us. We talked about, of course, dynamics and roles and just kind of how that flowed, and then we just had some fun too. And so I think that all of those different topics married together were just a beautiful blend. This is my opinion. A beautiful blend of just making sure that the whole person, spiritual intimacy too, we discussed the whole person is healthy, and how can I make sure that my marriage is continuing to grow? Because just like anything else, I think sometimes, unfortunately, we put our energy into our careers and our purposes and even our children, our bodies, making sure that we're healthy, we're working out. But what type of energy we put into our marriage? It's not something that we can put on the shelf and just kind of let it put on cruise control and think that it's going to be fine. It's going to crash. It's going to fall apart. This is two people coming together as one, and we think that we can just place it aside and it'll work things out. Nay, 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 nay. So I think it's important to understand that just as much energy, time, thought, prayer, discipline, sweat, tears, money, resources we put into those things to become successful or go to the next level, especially when we have a partner and a spouse that's along with us for the entire ride. And if any of those other things derail, they're still going to be with us. What more time and energy, resources, prayer, dedication should we put to making sure that our other half is healthy, is we're connected, we're on one accord, we're tracking together, and we don't kind of lose focus or get things out of balance? Because at first, our relationship with God is primary. The very second thing is our relationship with our spouse. The very second thing. So nothing else comes before that. Church is great, but our relationship with our spouse is second. Work is great. Our children are great. But the second thing in that order is our relationship with our spouse. And so just understanding that and realizing to put things in the right place is going to be necessary for successful marriages. Now, you can have a decent marriage and have a decent life, but I'm trying to be the best version of myself, and I want my marriage to be the same thing.
Come on, woman of God. I about wanted to high five you on so many things, but I'm like, I'm gonna let her ride, boy. She on one. Like I need every single word she just said. But that's so true. I mean, when you just hit home when you just talk about like how much more if we use that same energy and effort we put in our careers and did that into our marriage, that for one, that shows that it's possible, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
You can do this because I'm seeing you do this in another area.
Exactly. You have the capacity,
right?
You have the willingness, right?
Yeah, that's good. That's real good. So we, that's just good. So we talked about you said generational curses. What? I do want to talk about that. We'll talk about a little bit intimacy and just some of the fun, and we'll wrap it up from there. So, what when you said generational curses, like what was one of the angles or one of the points that you've seen that it was helpful that we talked about, or just to be able to get that topic out to start fleshing out what that even means? Because as we brought that out, like it was different for everyone. It was like, okay, so how would you look at that topic?
Yeah, so it's a topic that I'm just really passionate about. I think maybe one day down the road I'll write a book or something about it. But I just know I've seen it for myself. I've seen it for clients that I work with. And it's pretty fascinating to me to see how generational patterns, I'm talking behaviors, I'm talking, genetic makeup, I'm talking sicknesses, I'm talking brain, just cognitive brain processes and how those things can be passed down to your kids. Great and also not so great. And so I think that with that being a thing, I think it's just so important for us to identify the ones that are not that great and decide that the pattern will stop with our generation. Because if not, it'll just continue. Just speaking for an example, for my family, my husband's family, I'll use his family as an example. He'll love this, but his granddad, his dad's dad, had several women. I won't even say wives because he never married them. They all had several children, and he has seen that pattern continue with his dad, all of his siblings. Now, some people may say, well, that's not a big deal. That's what they want to do. Maybe not, but we've decided that we want to do a one man, one wife show over here. Okay. And so with that being said, we don't want those patterns. We don't want those habits. We're not interested in all the kids and all the things. And I'm not throwing shade. I promise I'm not throwing judgment, but that's what we wanted in our house. And so he said, to make sure, of course, I'm going to be wise. I'm going to make wise choices, but I don't want anything bucking up against my system internally or in the spirit realm. And I not realize it. So yeah, we're trying to do one man, one wife over here. Yeah. So we saw that continue, and he decided to stop the buck here. With my family, I've seen just women who grow bitter. That may seem so minute. Like, how do you call that generational? When you saw your grandma do it, all of her sisters, her mom do it, her mom do it, it's not coincidental. Those are generational curses that just carry weight. And so I don't call them, I don't think they're just happens chance. I don't take them lightly. There's just certain things that I'm not interested in. Sorry about that. I cut out for a second. I'm not interested.
Yep, I can
I'm
hear you.
sorry about that. I'm having some
No,
technical
you're good. You're good. You was
difficulties
cutting
over
in and
here.
out.
Yeah.
Oh, you're
So
good. Just take your
it's
time.
it's just something that we were intentional about. We've identified, and we're still digging deep to learn more and more about it. But for us, it just meant, what were those patterns that we've seen our parents do, our grandparents do, our aunts and our uncles, that we're not interested in continuing in. And also, a lot of times, Jabari, you see tendencies in yourself too. If you're honest with yourself,
Yeah, you're
sometimes
right.
you can be like, man, my dad does that. I'm in the same way. And sometimes it's great. And sometimes it's like, yeah, I'm not interested in this. And so just identifying those things and not calling our parents horrible people. One thing our parents did do is the best they could with what they had. I love the champion parents in that way. They did the best they could with what they had. And thank you for that. Now from
Yeah,
here, I take the baton and I make a decision to do what I'm going to do for my family. So that's a very surface level. Generational curses go deep. We could probably be here for hours, but that's the
yeah.
surface level idea of kind of like what that is, what it looks like. And sometimes you can identify by just seeing some of the patterns that exist throughout your family line.
One of the things that I think I talked about was that I seen, and it was like over time, and my wife to me all the time, and it was pride, and
Mm-hmm.
just being prideful. And I realized that, like, I think it goes back to the point of like, hey, we're not going to model this way or that way, but like unconsciously we're doing it, and we're not really humbling ourselves enough to be able to say, like,
Yeah.
you're doing it, like you are flat out doing it. Like, how can you be
Yeah.
so not? And so that was like a shocker to me. Like, the more and more now that I look back, I'm like, man, I'm being prideful about this. Like, and that
Mm.
is something that started, and that is like your transition. So it's small things like that. I think it's easy to overlook
Yeah,
because
it is, Jabari. It is.
we're looking at like the big picture, like bigger, like, oh well, at least I'm not doing this. No, it can be, it can be anything. And
Yes.
just like you say, hey, we stand with a one woman show over here, okay? So
Yes. Okay.
that's what we rolling with, and I
That's
respect
right.
that. So okay, so last thing, and then we're gonna get to some of the fun at marriage retreat. So now it was two aspects of intimacy. I'm not going to go in the deeper end, but I do want you to allude to the question that you did ask everyone, and kind of what was some of the answer that came about when you asked that question, if you remember.
Yeah, I remember a little bit. We just kind of asked people what their idea of intimacy was. When you hear a person ask, like, what is intimacy? What does your brain go to? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, oftentimes, this is not the case for everybody, but your brain goes to sexual intercourse or physical intimacy of that type thing. And
Right.
while that's a part of it, it is not all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Intimacy goes way beyond the bedroom, and it goes into conversation. It goes into relatability in order to understand how each other functions. It goes into the spiritual components of understanding what your spouse's relationship is with the Lord, and kind of how they flow in that realm. And so understanding that if you think that it's just a bedroom, we're missing it. You're actually selling yourself short. But you can find a deeper connection in the bedroom as husband and wife if you can learn to figure out what intimacy is on the intellectual level, on the spiritual level, on the emotional level, and connecting together in that capacity. So I think some of the responses were, I think everybody in our space kind of understood that it was much more than the sexual piece, which is good. And everybody was just kind of talking about their marriages and how they saw intimacy and areas they could grow and areas they were challenged in. And I think that everybody kind of walked away with the idea of what they can do or what they can implement to make sure that they're building their intimacy together as husband and wife. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no. And I was about to say that's it right there. I think the whole point of that question was to engage like your mind to say, okay, well, for one, you know what? Marriage is not just about sex. Like,
No.
intimacy has more to it than just the physical aspect of it. And
Yeah.
we, making that connection, like, you're right, but it's like, it's simple things like that. You need to connect and then say,
Yeah.
okay, now let's dive deeper into what that
Right.
means. Intimacy and conversation, your spiritual walk, and those things are important because it creates who you are.
That's right.
And like, if you don't take time to reflect on that and even
Hmm.
understand that for your spouse, then it's like
Yes.
you are doing a huge big
Yeah.
disservice to
Yes,
yourself.
sir.
So,
Yeah. I would
um,
agree too, because I think too that a lot of times, and I'm not speaking this over anybody in the situation, but what I've seen and what I've even just spoken to different clients about is a lot of times when people step out affair wise, it's not all physical.
mm,
Sometimes it's somebody that they feel like can connect with them, or somebody who can have an intellectual conversation, who can um, just challenge their psyche in a way that their spouses probably could if they took the time to realize that it was important to them.
right,
So it's not so much of, oh, I'm going to go and sleep in the bed with somebody and cheat on my husband or wife. No, we've been missing each other because we've been putting more time and energy into everything else except for ourselves. And
hmm,
so we're not on one accord in this capacity. So someone starts an intellectual conversation that sparks my interest. They then begin to speak my love language over time. And then you find yourself in a situation, you say, how did I get here? And we were just talking over coffee, or we were just talking in our cubicles. We were just having intellectual conversations over Instagram. You see what I'm saying? And so
right,
understanding that, not to spook anybody or speak anything, but it's our responsibility and due diligence as husband and wives to find out what drives your spouse in conversation. What things do they want to discuss? And you could probably, some people are like, I could care less to talk about this stuff. To be honest with you, I'd rather be doing something different. But it's important that we put ourselves second, kind of just swallow our pride and say, well, let me just do this because this makes them happy, right? This is what makes them thrive, and that drives a different level of connection and intimacy for our spouses, and then you'll become attractive to them on a different level. Like, I mean, I've always loved my husband. I've always loved, the physical component, but now I'm attracted to his mind, attracted to
mm.
her thoughts, attracted to her conversation, and so just understanding how all those things intertwine too.
You know what? I remember telling my aunt I was working on doing better, having intellectual conversations with my wife,
Mm-hmm.
and
Your wife goes deep.
oh man, like, I'm about to go there here to admit. Look, my wife is so deep. I'm like, bruh, like, can I come up for some air real quick? Like, I'm just like, so yeah. So I told her, I said, yeah, I'm working on doing better at that. So my aunt, who I love, who like a mom to me, she was like, how old are you? And she was like, honey, you doing much better than your uncle over there. I'm like, dang. I said, so this is a real thing.
Yes,
Like,
it
because,
is.
like, I mean, for one, if you grew up in a divorce household, the last thing you seen was an intellectual conversation,
Oh
or
yeah,
even that been even defined what
come
that
on.
means or even look like.
What is
So
that? Come on.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
intellectual conversation, like, I was happy. I was happy when I used to see husband and wife like come home and I've seen them give a kiss. I'm like, man, I ain't never seen that. Like, that's cool.
Right.
Like, I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So yeah, like the intellectual conversation. So this is my last plug. This is my also my other counseling session I'm getting in.
Come on,
So
bro.
yeah, so how do you get better at being more aware of how to have intellectual conversation with you even knowing my wife? Like,
Well,
and
I'll give you a secret. Just with
okay.
my, so we, of course, we had last year,
Mm-hmm.
and it was my first time really learning people. So I did a lot of watching and kind of just trying to figure out how people moved and that kind of stuff. But this year, I'm like, I wouldn't say that in 2 years spending a week together, you know everything about a person, but I can
Right,
definitely
right.
see how they think and how they process. And so when we got back, I've actually been in text message conversation with your wife, and we're getting ready to read a book together. So we're
What?
gonna read a book. We are. We're
Oh,
gonna read a book
snap.
and just have dialogue. It's actually called Black Fortunates, but I see how your wife just loves just intellect about the growth mindset, how to be wise with, and you're the same way with finances, and how to make sure that generational wealth is a thing, so that your children's children will be blessed by the things that you have put into place. I am just floored at the things you guys have with your residential properties that you have. It blows my mind, and so I can see that those are things that kind of drive you guys and drive
Mm-hmm.
her. So I had a book, and I thought I was going to have this one. It's actually sitting right here. It's called Think and Grow Rich about Napoleon
Mm-hmm.
Hill. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
Shania, I was like, we should read this. She was like, I already read it. And I was like, okay then. And I was like, because I asked her, I said, well, what are you reading now? She said, I need a good read. And I said, we should read this one. She was like, I already read it. I said, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. She said, I already read it. I
Already
was
read
like,
it.
okay. What about Black Portrait? She's like, I haven't read that one. So she said she ordered it on Amazon. It's coming on Monday and we're getting kickstarted. So right there, we're just going to
Okay.
have dialogue around something that interests her. And my whole purpose in that is to, of course, learn from her, but even just grow in relationship as friends, you know, as
Yeah.
girlfriends to develop in that way. So that's a little cheat for you. I don't know if you guys, you know, want to read a book per se, but just asking her like, hey babe, like what's on your head today? What are you thinking about? What are you processing? And I have to do that with TJ because sometimes he'll say nothing. I'm like, your brain is going inside your brain. I can see it through your skin. What
Come
are you
on. Yeah.
thinking about? You
Exactly.
know?
Like, bro,
And
your head
so,
is spinning over there.
oh yes. And so just learning that and then learning the proper times of that. Sometimes they're still, my husband's a processor. I don't know if your wife is, but sometimes they're not ready to talk about it out loud because it's still processing. So then they'll say it. And then it's like, okay, now I have to do my due diligence just to ask the right questions for the dialogue to continue type thing.
I think my wife is like, I think she's 100% locked and loaded, just ready. Like
At all times.
it at all times. Like it's like, well, bro, I've been on that. Like, I was like, when
What are
you
you
read the book,
talking
I read
about?
it. Yep, I read it. Yep, already read it. Yep.
Yeah,
No, it's
yep.
read
And I was
twice.
like, dang, okay, let me get my life
Exactly.
together.
I'm telling you, bro.
She's
She's
on
a
it.
beast. I love the mess out of her too for it too.
Yes.
And she definitely keeps me on my treadmill as far as like, okay, I'm gonna get that. I need to get to this next point. So
Yeah.
okay. Well, that's super helpful. That's
Yeah.
very, very helpful. And now I know. I ain't gonna lie to you. I may hit you up. I'm like, hey, Joy, I
Come
got
on,
the
bro, I
thing.
got you.
Hey, look, I told TJ, hey, bro, I need as much help I can get now. So,
Look, I got an in. I got an in, so I got you.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, Joy, this has been very fun.
Yes, I've enjoyed it as well.
And I think you know, one of my goals with this podcast is not only want to talk about the importance of having a marriage retreat, but just the importance of marriage and not only how much I value it, but the people that's around me that value it, because it also drives the importance of, I guess, how important or high priority it is in my life. And two, I want that to be a part in everyone's life. I think, you know, those who's married, those who's thinking about marriage,
Right.
and maybe those who didn't have a successful marriage but want to still be in a marriage. I think it was created for a beautiful reflection of who God is, and more so of the love He has for us.
That's right.
So, Joy, where can people find you? Where can they know more about this Joy and life coach and just some of the goodness you talked about?
Oh, yes. So actually, as of current, my website is under construction. We're doing some rebuilding and rebranding, but I can be located via social media. So on Instagram, I'm just Joy_Bradford. It's plain and simple.
Okay.
On Facebook, I'm just Joy Bradford. So if you look up my name, you should be able to locate me that way. But if you want to send an email, you can also reach out to Life Coach Joy Bradford at gmail.com. So it's Joy, my first name, and the last name is Brad, like the name, Ford, like the truck.